I can't stop trembling while I write these lines. Just a few hours ago, I found them together in my own house with their hands and lips tangled in an act that made me want to tear my eyes out. Antonio, the man I believed to be faithful and protective, was passionately kissing the woman who gave me life. My mother. I'm still crying, unable to understand how the affection in my home could turn into such a filthy scene. I feel my heart broken, my skin burning with rage and shame. I wonder if I was blind, if I overlooked all the signs. I look around and only see the remnants of a love torn to pieces. I need to tell my story, even if it hurts. I need to shout to the world that what happened here was an unimaginable betrayal, a deceit that fed on the blood of my own family. And the worst thing is that, despite everything, I don't know if one day I'll be able to forgive them. 3 days before my world fell apart, my mother called me in an unusual way, almost at midnight. It seemed strange to me because she was never one to stay up late. I picked up the phone, worried, thinking she might be sick or that something serious had happened. "Marisa, daughter, did I wake you?" she asked in a low voice, as if holding something back. "No." "It's okay, Mom. Are you all right?" I replied, feeling a bit anxious. "Yes, I couldn't sleep and wanted to know how you were," she answered with a tone I couldn't figure out. At that moment, I noticed that Antonio was stirring in bed, pretending to be asleep, but his breathing was strangely fast. With the darkness of the room, I couldn't see his face clearly. Even so, I didn't worry too much. I spoke to my mother for a couple of minutes, trying to calm her down, and I even offered to visit her the next day, but she refused with a barely convincing excuse. "No, daughter, better another day. I'm very tired," she said, and hung up. I let it go. I thought maybe she was having a bad day and didn't give it more thought. How naive I was. The next morning, I got up early, and, while making coffee, I saw that Antonio was nervously checking his phone. I asked him if something was wrong, and he avoided my gaze. "No, my love. Nothing. Just work-related tasks." That day, my mother showed up at our house around noon, without warning. Antonio had left minutes before for an alleged business meeting, so I was the one who received her. She had a strange energy. She was wearing more makeup than usual, with tight clothes that weren't her usual style. "Mom, is something wrong?" I asked, somewhat worried. "No, daughter, I just wanted to visit you. I brought you some pastries I made this morning," she replied, leaving them on the table. I tried talking to her, but she seemed distracted, constantly checking the time as if waiting for someone. When I asked why she kept looking at her wrist, she gave me a tense smile. "Oh, it's just that I'm supposed to meet a friend later." That answer didn't sit well with me. Still, I didn't suspect anything concrete. She was my mother, after all. How was I going to think badly of her? Before leaving, she asked about Antonio. "And Antonio? Is he working? Will he be back soon?" She probed, with a peculiar gleam in her eyes. "Yes, he left a little while ago. He'll probably be back in the afternoon, I guess," I replied, puzzled by her curiosity. When she left, I was left with a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, like a dark premonition. I shook my head, refusing to think of anything crazy. Even so, my chest tightened in a way I'd never felt before. That same day, at nightfall, Antonio came home looking more unsettled than usual. He kissed me on the cheek and locked himself in the bedroom with his phone in hand. I heard him whispering bits of phrases, as if trying to keep me from listening. "Yes, we'll talk later. Don't worry. We'll see each other tomorrow." My heart pounded, but I tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was work, maybe it was a nervous client, or maybe something far worse. I ignored it because the truth hurts, and I preferred to shield myself with naivety. The next day, I felt anxious, not really knowing why. I woke up early and saw that Antonio was no longer in bed. I found him in the kitchen, checking his phone again, with a half-finished cup of coffee. He jumped when he saw me walk in. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Good morning. I was waiting for you to have breakfast, But I got distracted, he said, putting his phone in his pants pocket. We had breakfast in silence. Me with a lump in my throat that I couldn't explain, him staring out the window. When we finished, I got dressed and went out to do some shopping. I needed to distract my mind from these ominous feelings. However, at the supermarket, every aisle reminded me of the everyday life I had with Antonio. Every piece of fruit, every can, every sale made me think of the stability I thought I had. When I got back, I noticed something right away that disturbed me. My mother's perfume lingered in the living room. It was unmistakable, an intense floral scent she'd been using for years. But she wasn't there, nor were there any signs that she had come. Antonio wasn't there either. Maybe I'm imagining things, I told myself, trying to calm down a bit. But that persistent fragrance felt like a silent warning, a clue I didn't want to accept. The hours passed, and Antonio showed up around 8 at night, his hair wet, as if he'd showered somewhere else. I confronted him gently, trying not to sound paranoid. "Did you go out with my mother today?" "I think I smelled her perfume when I got home." "Your mother? Number I was at the office, then with a client? Maybe she came by in the morning and didn't tell you," he answered, shrugging. His answer didn't reassure me because my mother would never come into my house without letting me know, or at least not before. But again, I pushed down my worry. Maybe it's me, I'm being too sensitive, I thought. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning in bed. I noticed Antonio couldn't sleep either. I felt him get up a couple of times to go into the hallway and take a call, speaking in almost inaudible tones. I bit my lips to avoid bursting with accusations I had no proof of. The fateful day arrived. I got up determined to do a general cleaning in the house, hoping to distract my head from the doubts that were suffocating me. Antonio told me he was going to an important lunch with some suppliers. It struck me as odd, because he usually gave me more details about his schedule. Late in the morning, I decided to open the windows to air out the living room. Then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. I had a bad feeling. When I picked up, I heard the broken voice of a neighbor I barely knew. "Excuse me, Marisa. I'm not sure if I should tell you this, but I just saw your mother getting into a car that looked a lot like your husband's. I don't want to interfere, but it's not the first time it's happened." I was speechless, my heart pounding in my chest. I thanked the neighbor, hung up, and froze in place. It could be a misunderstanding. Without thinking, I ran to the bedroom and threw on whatever clothes I found. I left almost automatically, feeling my legs give out. All I could think was, how can my mother be with Antonio at this hour, going who knows where, when he's supposed to be at a work lunch? The drive to the address where I knew Antonio usually met his clients felt endless. My breathing was rapid, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. When I arrived, I didn't see his car. I called Antonio, but he didn't answer. I tried calling my mother, and she didn't pick up either. My desperation grew until I realized they might be at my own house. Something inside me was screaming that I had to go back. I turned the car around and headed home. On the way, tears started falling uncontrollably. I gritted my teeth, cursing myself for not speaking up earlier, for not checking their phones or confronting my suspicions. I hated the thought of walking in and catching them doing something disgusting. I had never felt such a strange trembling as the one that overtook me when I crossed that half-open door. A mix of aromas, perfume, sweat, something almost metallic, pierced my nose. On the couch, my mother and Antonio seemed to be in another world. Their bodies fit together like pieces of a puzzle, their lips intertwined in a blind act of desire that made me burn with rage. Every sound they made turned my stomach. I stood there watching them, unable to speak. Suddenly, she looked up and saw me, horror appearing on her face in excruciating clarity. A scream rose from my throat, echoing like a cursed reverberation. What is this?" I shrieked, my voice raw with pain. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. My mother, the woman who gave me life, in my husband's arms. They approached me with their hands outstretched, trying to stop me, but I moved back. I felt nauseated, as though I'd just witnessed a sacrilege. How was such cruelty possible? How dared they use my home for this infamy? "Marisa, please listen to me," my mother pleaded, tears in her eyes. "My love, I can explain," Antonio added, his voice cracking. "Don't call me my love or ask me to listen. There's no forgiveness for you," I shouted, my throat on fire. The pain and anger mixed inside me, making me tremble from head to toe. Everything I once considered love and protection turned into a disgusting trap right before my eyes. I ran out, as if the air in the house was poisoning me. I hurried down the stairs, stumbling, crying so hard I felt like I was going to choke. I reached the street without knowing where to go. My vision was blurred by tears. I leaned against a streetlight, trying to catch my breath, but there was a knot in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe. Through my tears, I took out my phone and called my best friend, Lucia. When she heard my broken voice, she knew something was very wrong. I can't even talk, Lucia. I'm in front of my house. I don't know what to do," I managed to say with difficulty. "Tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you. Please don't stay there," she replied, alarmed. I could barely give her the address before hanging up. I waited, feeling like an abandoned child. Sometimes I heard footsteps behind me, and I was terrified they were coming after me. I was overcome by disgust, shame, disbelief. After a few agonizing minutes, Lucia arrived in her car. She jumped out as soon as she saw me in that state. She hugged me tightly and asked what had happened. It took me a while to speak, but when I did, her eyes went wide. Even she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Oh my God, Marisa, your mother, Antonio? This is insane." I could only look at her, unable to find words to describe the horror of that moment. Lucia put me in her car and drove me straight to a hotel because she didn't want me spending the night alone in my apartment. And I was in no condition to refuse. At the hotel, I locked myself in the room, took off my shoes, and let myself fall onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. A faint dizziness came over me. I had cried so much that I could barely form any coherent thoughts. Lucia sat beside me, stroking my hair. "Marisa, I'm here," she murmured. "I swear I won't leave you alone." I closed my eyes, and the image of those two people came to me vividly. The trembling returned, and a spasm of nausea drove me to the bathroom. Kneeling before the toilet, I emptied my stomach, feeling like I was expelling what little stability I had left. In the early morning, my phone started ringing. It was Antonio. He wanted to give me explanations, according to the text message that accompanied the call. I blocked him immediately, without hesitation. Then, my mother tried calling. I blocked her too. I didn't have the strength to listen to them. Just seeing their names on the screen made me nauseous. Lucia woke up when she heard the noises and looked at me with compassion. She insisted that I should talk to someone else I trusted. But I couldn't think straight. More than anything, I needed to come to terms with what I'd just witnessed. How do you heal the wound of seeing your husband, the person you planned a future with, wrapped in caresses with your own mother? "I don't know, Lucia. I don't know how to get over this. I'm so broken. I can't even feel my own breathing anymore," I said without thinking. My friend hugged me again, and that's how, between tears, I ended up falling asleep for a few hours. When I woke up, the sun was already seeping through the curtains. The pain was still lodged in my chest, and upon opening my eyes, I felt the crushing reality. It wasn't a dream. It was my life, destroyed. I spent the rest of the day submerged in tears. With infinite patience, Lucia suggested that later we should go pick up my belongings from the house. I couldn't leave everything behind without at least rescuing my clothes, my documents, and my most cherished memories. "I'll go with you. You don't have to see it as a confrontation. Just take your things and leave," she proposed firmly. Even though the idea terrified me, I knew she was right. I couldn't live the rest of my life with only what I had on. That same afternoon, we got into her car and returned to the place I used to call home, which now felt like a minefield. My heart pounded 1,000 beats per minute as we climbed the stairs to the apartment. The door was closed. I went in with my key, trembling. Inside, everything was silent. Suddenly, I saw my mother sitting on the couch, her eyes swollen from crying. She stood up when she saw me, and the first thing I felt was a blow of fury in my chest. "Daughter, please listen to me," she whispered, coming toward me. "Don't call me daughter. Not after what you did," I replied, my voice shaking with rage and pain. Lucia stood beside me like a shield. My mother stopped, tears pouring down her face. Even so, I couldn't allow her grief to soften me. I continued on toward the bedroom, ignoring her pleas. I grabbed my suitcases and started packing my clothes in tense silence. "Marisa, you have every right to feel like this. You can't imagine how sorry I am." I heard my mother's voice from behind the door. "If you were truly that sorry, you wouldn't have done it," I answered with a coldness I didn't recognize in myself. I wondered where Antonio was. Maybe he had the decency to leave, to spare me the humiliation of seeing him. I didn't feel even the slightest desire to confront him. It was enough for me just to collect my things and get out of there. After half an hour, I closed the suitcase. I peeked out onto the balcony. My mother was still there, her head lowered. When she saw me, she put a hand over her heart. "Daughter, please," she repeated, her voice cracking. I looked at her mercilessly. For my entire life, this woman had been my support, my confidant. Now, she had become the person who hurt me the most. "I don't want to hear anything. I need time, distance, whatever. But from you, I don't want anything right now," I declared. She covered her face with her hands, crying. I felt a very brief pang of compassion, but the wound was bigger than any blood tie. I turned and left, Lucia behind me. I left my mother in tears, maybe realizing too late the magnitude of her betrayal. Antonio's calls kept coming to my phone. At first, I ignored them, but one day, almost on impulse, I answered. I needed to hear whatever he had to say, if only to confirm that there was nothing left to save. We arranged to meet in a cafe. I went alone. Lucia didn't want to leave me, but I asked her to trust me. When I arrived, I saw him looking pale, thinner, with a vacant stare. He stood up when he saw me, but I didn't hug him. I sat down in the chair across from him, staring into his eyes. "Marisa," he whispered, as if afraid to break the silence. "Talk. What can you tell me?" I attacked immediately, my jaw tense. Antonio lowered his gaze. He started mumbling explanations that justified nothing. He told me about the forbidden spark he felt with my mother, the temptation that got out of hand, about not knowing how to stop once that dirty game started. My stomach churned at every word. A game? A temptation? How could he talk like that? "Do you realize you destroyed my life and my trust in a single act?" I said, my voice breaking. "I know, and I'm so sorry I don't even have words. But I swear I love you, Marisa. It was a mistake, a moment of..." I didn't let him continue. I stood up so fast I almost spilled my glass of water. I looked at him with a burning heart. "Don't talk to me about love. Don't try to cover up what you did with cheap excuses. You've broken me in the cruelest way. And you'll have to live with that," I exclaimed, feeling a chill run through my body. Antonio hung his head and said nothing else. I walked out without saying goodbye, leaving behind a man I once believed was my life partner. His voice was swallowed up by the bar as I walked away, my eyes clouded with tears. I went back to Lucia's apartment, which had become my temporary refuge. I wouldn't let go of my phone in case something happened. On sleepless nights, I replayed the scene of my mother and Antonio. Their bodies pressed together, their lips locked. The couch in my house turned into their meeting place. And I would break into tears again as if it were the first time. For weeks, my mother kept sending me messages asking for forgiveness. She tried to visit me, left notes at Lucia's door, but I wouldn't open. I needed to recover from that blow. Little by little, I managed to find a cheap apartment on the outskirts of the city. Lucia helped me move. I felt relieved knowing I wouldn't have to set foot in that house again. As the days went by, the intensity of the pain came and went. Sometimes I felt strong, determined to leave that nightmare behind. Other times, I woke up crying at the memory of the harm done. Still, I tried to establish a routine, getting up early, exercising, trying to focus on my job. I knew I wouldn't get over everything overnight, but clinging to everyday life kept me anchored to sanity. About 2 months went by before I agreed to see my mother again. She called me relentlessly until one day I gave in and answered. We met in a public park. I didn't want to see her in an enclosed place, afraid my emotions would overflow again. When I saw her, I noticed she'd lost weight and looked tired. She greeted me timidly without daring to hug me. At first, I didn't know what to say. We sat on a bench, surrounded by people strolling around, unaware of the tension between us. "Marisa, what I did is inexcusable," she began, her voice shaking. "I know I hurt you in the worst way. I feel dirty, ashamed, and I don't have the slightest excuse." I stayed silent, watching my trembling hands in my lap. A knot formed in my throat. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm devastated. I don't even understand how I let myself get carried away by something so vile." I felt empty, overwhelmingly lonely, and Antonio made me feel desired. "But none of that justifies the betrayal toward you," she continued, crying. Hearing her words felt like one slap after another. I remembered my childhood when she protected me from everything bad. How did she end up stealing the man I loved? Had my family now gained an indelible stain? "Mom, what you did isn't easily forgiven," I managed to say, feeling myself break. "I wish I could tell you that one day it will pass, but I don't know. I understands. I just want you to know that, as your mother, I still love you. And I respect that you need time." Tears ran down my cheeks. Seeing her like that tore me apart, but the resentment was still alive. I stood up without saying anything else. I felt I couldn't stay there. I took a few steps, and before leaving, I turned to her. "Take care, and don't look for me for a while. I'll let you know when I'm ready." I left with a hole in my chest, but also with a slight sense of relief. At least I wasn't hiding anymore. I knew it would take a long time to heal this wound if it ever truly healed. A few months have passed since that meeting. I'm still living alone in my tiny apartment, trying to gather the pieces of my dignity. I've gone to therapy. I've talked to friends who have supported me unconditionally. Even so, there are days when the mere memory of what happened leaves me breathless. Antonio vanished from my life. He hasn't called again, and I haven't tried to contact him. I don't know if he's still with my mother, or if they both realized that what they had couldn't continue without completely destroying what remained of our family. Honestly, I don't care anymore. I've gone back to some activities that once excited me, but that I had set aside before. I signed up for yoga classes and learned that controlling my breathing can calm, at least a bit, my internal storms. Therapy helped me understand that forgiveness isn't an obligation, but rather a personal decision that comes when you're ready. Maybe one day I'll forgive my mother, maybe not. But what's important is that I won't let resentment consume me. Telling this story is part of my struggle. I want anyone who hears it to know that betrayal can come from the person you least expect. And yes, it hurts like a knife stabbing your soul. But I also want them to know it's possible to get back up, gather the ashes, and move forward. It isn't easy. It isn't quick. But you can do it. Maybe the wound will never fully close, but at least it no longer bleeds like before. Now I know I can survive the worst betrayal, even if it comes from someone who should have protected me. And that lesson, bitter as it is, has shown me the strength I carry inside. This is my story. Painful, dirty, full of tears and rage. But it's also proof that In the darkest darkness, sometimes you find the light of your own soul. I thank Unforgettable Love Stories for sharing my story and allowing me to voice these scars that hurt me so much.